What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Puma MB.04. Let's get into them. Now, if you're looking at the 4s and thinking they look a lot like the 3s, you would be correct, and that's kind of held true all the way from the MB.01. And there's just been incremental changes along the way, nothing really radically different. There are, like I said, some small tweaks to this that I think were in response to a few things that happened in the last NBA season. Some of those tweaks you can actually feel. Other parts of the shoe do feel exactly the same as the old. So I think it really pays to pay attention to the little things in this one, because that's going to make the distinction on whether or not you really want to buy these or just look for discounted old ones. So let's see what they are. Starting off in the uppers, there actually is a ton of paneling and foxing that goes. It really concentrates in the forefoot, but it does extend all the way up the lace line and all the way to the rear foot of the shoe. So there's quite a bit more foxing and reinforcement in the 4s versus the 3s in the uppers. I think that's kind of the biggest change in the uppers of these things. The tongue is incredibly padded. There's 3 layers of padding in that tongue, and you do feel it. The lockdown on these is incredibly comfortable. I mean, just a super plush feeling. I mean, obviously very similar to the 3s, but it does bear repeating that this is a very, very comfortable lockdown, very aggressive gusset on this. So you do feel, hugged in this shoe. And, we obviously I got to talk about the actual lockdown of these. I found the heel slippage to be mild to none. I would hope so, just with the profile, how much padding is in the rear foot, the lockdown on them, how substantial the tongue and the gusset is. So in terms of lockdown, whether it be new or once they're broken in, yeah, really darn good. Now you look at this thing on the breathability test, they only heated up 112.8 degrees, which obviously isn't super elite, but for as much padding as there is in the tongue, and then there's 2 layers of padding here in the forefoot. Obviously the gusset is a very thin layer of padding, but then there's a pretty substantial layer of padding above that, and then all that backing above that. I mean, it's mostly the tongue and the sides that are breathing in it, but it's the materials also that are handling that heat, just better than some others. Look at the breathability mapping, kind of see what I'm talking about. Fog is not getting out of anywhere besides really around the tongue. I mean, the forefoot, there is no breathing in there whatsoever. It is a very, very tight weave in there, plus all of that paneling. So in terms of moisture retention, yeah, on a very hot, humid day, that they're probably going to retain some moisture. Now, as you go into the rear foot, it has that same really just wide padding in the rear foot that the 3s did. They actually do have stitching on the heel counter on the outside of it, on the medial side. Is that going to impart maybe a little bit more stability to the shoe, maybe make it a little bit more durable over time? Maybe. I mean, the heel counter on this is pretty stiff to begin with on the internal side. So really the rear foot in these, is a little bit stiffer. Now look at this thing on the upper durability test, 10-second Tire Grit sandpaper. The burr does not make it all the way through the paneling. You can actually start to see the clear coat underneath of it, but it does not get into the weave underneath of that. So in terms of dragging or sliding, honestly, either for outdoors or indoors, I think these are decent. The tread, obviously, is a completely different story on outdoor courts, but if you're dragging and sliding on these on indoor courts, especially, I think more importantly, these more to blunt trauma and containment, I think that these uppers are pretty darn good. But getting into the midsole teardown, honestly, exactly the same as the MB.03. Get the 2 slabs of nitro foam in the rear and forefoot. The MB.03 ones, it did seem a little bit more open pored, right? A little bit more porous than these ones. Is that just the slab of foam that they cut on these or not? Maybe. I'm guessing that's probably the case. But then you just have an entire bed of the carrier foam. Then you do have a shank that does go from the midfoot into the forefoot, and that is bottom-loaded shank for a little bit more stability in the shoe. And it is a pretty flat bottom shoe. There's a little bit of rise in the forefoot, but otherwise it is a pretty flat to the ground shoe. Look at this thing on the bounce height test. Got 31 centimeters in the rear foot, 33 in the forefoot. And, that's kind of that mid-range we see from Puma a lot, kind of in that middle-of-the-road category. Honestly, the MB.03, MB.04, and 2s and the 1s, much more meant for shock absorption, in my opinion. They've got that really dense foam, but where the ball of your foot is coming down, a little bit more forgiving nitro foam. I know that you hear nitrogen-infused foam and you think bounce, you think, springiness. And in this case, though, this just, to me, it screams more. It's kind of a relief for your heel and for the ball of your foot to come down on, while the under slab of foam, the carrier foam, does a lot of the work in terms of shock absorption, kind of insulating you from the ground. But getting into my favorite update from the MB.03, a true upgrade in my opinion, is the outsole tread. In terms of performance on indoor courts, I do think that this this tread pattern, this rubber performs a little bit better than the 3s. Now, number one, you do have two separate treads. They have the same durometer, okay, but the rear foot is more of a flat tread with a punched in tread pattern, and then in the forefoot, it's more of just a linear, very, very gentle wave, and then a UFO in the forefoot, just proving once again that the tread pattern honestly doesn't matter as long as you've got tread lines going in different directions, so you're parallel and perpendicular to your planes of motion, different planes of motion, right? You could be perpendicular when you're going side to side as well as being perpendicular when you're going front to back. Honestly, to me, the tread pattern doesn't matter. Now, you look at this thing on the grip test ramp, doesn't slip till 40 degrees, which is pretty good. Look at it on the viewing box, and there's a lot more rubber movement than you would think are on these shoes. And that's because the tread is very, very thin. Now, with that comes a lot of grabbing power, a lot of grip, and a lot of more nimble grip. These do not feel like super glue on the ground. They grip and they stay gripping. They do not pick up a lot of dust, at least for me. And this court here is dusty. And even from the community center court, which, like I said, a little more controlled, conditions to this one, which is a little more dusty. Neither of them I ever had a problem slipping whatsoever. And like I said, it also didn't feel like I was peeling up off the ground, which is nice. Now, look at this thing on the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, and woof. Even though the durometer is 16.5, still a little bit over a millimeter of damage on these. That's just because the tread is so thin. So taking these on outdoor courts is kind of a no-go. I know that Leylah Fernandez, WTA tennis player, did play in the Stewies for a while that have a similar tread pattern to these and a similar rubber compound. She can get new shoes. And the thing is, yeah, they will work well on outdoor courts while they are new and the foam insulates you from the outdoor courts, right? I mean, they actually do have some good properties for outdoor courts, but to me, it's just, if you're buying these and don't want to just run through them really quick, keep them on indoor courts. And kind of going back to the midsole, talking about more of the shock absorptive capabilities of these, look at the speed ratio. They come in at a 1.92, shank score of 0.2, brings it up to a 2.12. I kind of think that's where they belong. When you first have them on and your legs are fresh, you don't really feel the weight of them as much. But I think as they get a little bit more waterlogged with moisture and just as your legs and feet get tired, I think that's when you start to feel the weight of these more and more, especially because they are more bottom stable shoes. And another word for that can be bottom heavy. So no, not the speediest things on planet Earth, but for their profile, more nimble than you would think. And honestly, just talking about stopping power, they do have a little bit more reinforcement here on the lateral forefoot versus the 3s, which just kind of had the rubber coming up over them. And I know that there's been ankle sprain concerns with these. I still say that I don't think that these shoes cause ankle sprains whatsoever, but also I don't think Puma is doing as much as they could to make these great for ankle sprainers. Yeah, this container here does aid in stopping power quite a bit. And because they are flat to the ground, plus the bottom loaded shank, plus the more bottom heavy, I don't feel unstable in these whatsoever. But you can't get over the fact that the forefoot is pretty darn streamlined. And yes, they are bottom heavy, bottom stable shoes, but you are sitting kind of high in them. And like I said, there's not a lot of width in the forefoot. So if you step on someone or there's something that's out of your control, it's not like the Skechers XKX Float where like the shoe just does not want to roll, or some other shoes where it just stays stable. So I do think Puma could have just added even just a little bit of a clip flange here, something just to give it a little bit more stability. And I don't think they're unstable by any means, but you still can't get over the fact that it is an incredibly streamlined forefoot. Yeah, there is a little bit more reinforcement on these, and yeah, these do feel a little bit more stable than the 3s, but there still isn't a huge flange on them. And getting into the fit of the 4s, this is another thing that I think critics of the MB.04 are going to look to in terms of stability. Now, number one, they have a 14-degree forefoot inflare, which, yeah, is getting up there, right? And the more the shoe inflares, the more nimble it's going to feel, but also, the potential for less stability. But these also have a 9-degree rear foot inflare versus the midfoot. So the shoe is a little bit more C-shaped. And anytime you got a C-shaped shoe, as well as a C-shaped foot, you're more prone to instability. Now, I'll say this again, I did not feel unstable in these whatsoever. They did feel pretty, solid to the ground, but that is something you have to take into consideration. Now, in terms of the rest of the fit of the shoe, they come in at 28.9 centimeters, so just a hair long, and then 9.3 centimeter metatarsal width, 10.3 centimeter toe box width, and then a toe box taper of 30 degrees, so on the upper level of that mid-range. To me, these were very forgiving in terms of fit. They also fit my foot very well, right? They're kind of shaped like my foot is shaped, right? So if you want to think of like an anatomic shoe, like this is kind of an anatomic shoe for my foot. So I did like that. I think if you're a narrow or medium foot, I think you still can just go true to size. And these, there's a ton of padding in them so that they sculpt to a lot of different feet. If you are narrow and short-footed, I think you probably could go down a half size. You might have a little bit of break in there, but you can get some weight reduction, which would be really, really nice. Medium 2E, I say go true to size. 4E, probably go up 1/2 size. If you're a 4E and going up more than 1/2 size, you could start to get into heel slip territory, even though these are a little more maximalist, as well as the shoe is a little bit hair long, it's heavy. So kind of take that. If you don't mind that, if you're a longer foot, don't mind a little bit more of the weight, then by all means go up that one size. Now in terms of the snake bitten foot, these lock an orthotic down really well, even a more maximalist orthotic. Plus they're pretty insulating as it is. So, you know, anything from heel pain, ball of foot pain, arch strain, especially because like I said, you can get an orthotic in these. I think they're fantastic. In terms of like shin splints, things like that, I wouldn't say they're my favorite shoe just because while they don't have any discomfort and I didn't have any break-in and they do feel very buttery, they are still a lot of shoe to get around. And there just are other shoes that are better than that. If you're talking about pure shock absorption, then yeah, they're okay. It's just, but you know, getting the shoe to move as well. You got to think of that as well. So let's say lumps, bumps, bruises on your foot, especially with an orthotic in them. And yeah, I think they're pretty good. And getting into the performance of the MB.04, I know this is a basketball shoe review, but did find these to be really sneakily good mid-top shoes for pickleball. Like I said, because the traction of them, really, really nimble, but gripping and confident, and kind of get low, but you still kind of have that maximalist feel to them, almost like a Prince high top on an outdoor tennis court. So want to get that out of the way, just talking about performance. In terms of, you know, prowess on indoor courts, like I said, I don't think they're good for outdoor courts. No, they're not rocket ships. They do feel good coming down, right? And like I said, they are very nimble for more of a maximalist shoe. That's kind of been their MO, right? They're just more nimble maximalist shoes with a lot of shock absorption. Not a lot new though from the threes. I think they're just a hair more stable than the threes while retaining a lot of that kind of bear hug, you know, type comfort in them. And like I said, I think the grip on them and they're just a little bit more nimble than the threes. You know, I think that's kind of the name of the game with the fours, is that they just increased the amount of tactile sensation you can get in this shoe just by kind of changing the tread pattern. Really everything else very, very similar, and they do feel maybe just a little bit more containing than the threes, maybe just a hair more stable, so you have a little more confidence. And maybe that's where that feeling that these shoes are a little more nimble than the threes comes from, is maybe just a hair more confidence. Like I said, you still sit up pretty high. The foam is still pretty bottom heavy, bottom stable. So I think if you liked the ones, twos, and the threes, you're gonna like the fours. If you didn't like the ones, twos, and the threes, I don't know if the changes are enough to make you really say like, oh yeah, I definitely gotta get them. But I think if maybe you're on the fence, then maybe this update is enough for you. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. You're going with these, going with another Puma shoe. Because remember, Puma makes, you know, great basketball shoes. There's not a paucity of choice for Puma shoes. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to see what I'm talking about with some other Puma shoes that maybe are lower top, more stable, and to me play a little bit better, the Puma Stewie 3 go under the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.